The last board member I'd like to introduce you to is a longtime LGBTQ community leader and activist, one of the key organizers who worked for the passage of the ordinances and policies that we will discuss tonight. And it makes me very happy to tell you that he is the president-elect of the Dallas Way. So we will be, thank you, because it doesn't always happen in 501c3s in the community to have such fantastic leadership come up when it's time to pass the torch. And how incredible that Steve Atkinson will take that mantle. And because we're in the rosary, we might say that I will be passing the crown to Steve.
Yes.
Yes. To that fine human being. He will be wearing the crown in 2025. So please welcome to the stage our friend and our partner in good trouble, Mr. Steve Atkinson.
As our influence in Dallas as a community had grown, our community had begun to fully have a seat at the table of politics in this city. So we therefore were prepared for the battles that were undertaken from the mid-90s through 2002, leading to the passage of non-discrimination policies and ordinances that extended protections to LGBTQ people in our city. Micah England was denied employment as a Dallas police officer because of her sexual orientation. In 1990, she sued the city. Legal battles and appeals continued for several years, but Micah's case was the impetus for a long push to get the police department to amend its employment policies so that LGBTQ people were protected from discrimination. In 1995, Cece Cox was the president of the Dallas Gay and Lesbian Alliance, known as DGLA. I co-chaired at that time, along with the incredible Christy Kinsler, who sadly is not with us anymore. We co-chaired the board of the Lesbian Gay Political Coalition, which is also called LGBTQ. Cece and I had begun to work together on various activism projects with the help and support of the members of those two organizations, DGLA and LGBTQ. One of my favorite quotes by the late and very great civil rights activist, Congressman John Lewis, is, "Get in good trouble, necessary trouble." Cece and I quickly learned how to follow that advice. We hatched and organized a plan to push forward with intensity to get the city of Dallas to pass a non-discrimination policy that provided workplace protections for our community, not just for the Dallas Police Department, but also for all city employees and the Dallas Fire Department. It took months of work, both outside and inside of City Hall, and there was a lot of help we had inside City Hall. It wasn't just what we were doing on the outside. All of these battles take a village. And in our case, it took a village of activists and a village of office holders and a village of allies, all working together to make these things happen. Chris Luna was elected to the Dallas City Council in 1991, and Craig McDaniel was elected in 1993 as the first openly gay council member. We worked closely with Craig and Chris, and they were instrumental in the passage of the policy in 1995 that gave the protections to city employees. So much I want to say that I can't, there's just, your mind just goes in a million different directions and all these little sidebar stories, and you're going to hear some of that still tonight. But we were not content to stop there. And later, in 1995, the organized efforts we worked on led to the Dallas Area Rapid Transit Board enacting a policy that provided workplace protections for its employees and included protections for our community. And it didn't stop there. In 1996, we were able to get the board of Dallas Independent School District to enact an anti-harassment policy that included protections for LGBTQ students, teachers, and employees. The next year, the need arose, and we made good trouble again. That culminated with a new policy for Dallas schools, which prevented the district from censoring content of student publications and productions solely because of mentioning or addressing sexual orientation. You can do the math on that. I said the need arose, so we're not going to go through all the details, but the need arose. We were tipped off to it. We jumped in there, and largely with the help of Jose Plata, who was a Dallas school board member then and openly gay, we were able to get those two ordinances enacted. And I'm also going to just say there weren't a lot of major school districts passing those kinds of policies in that day. And there weren't a lot of cities, even the big major ones, that were passing the ordinances that were being passed here in that era. We were ahead of the curve. Okay, from the time of the passage of the city's employment non-discrimination policy in 1995, our LGBTQ activist band of brothers and sisters was intent on ultimately getting a comprehensive non-discrimination ordinance passed that would be citywide. Cece and I, along with several members of the DGLA board, worked toward that goal. It took many meetings with the city manager, city attorneys, and members of the Dallas City Council. And you're going to hear firsthand what was happening at City Hall they were working on too. We secured the support of allies, business leaders, and even members of the clergy. We were close to success, but did not have a mayor who would prioritize this issue. That changed when Laura Miller was elected Dallas mayor. She and I have been plotting during her campaign, and she promised us that she would make it a top priority of hers to get the ordinance passed quickly if she won the election. She kept that promise. In May of 2022, the ordinance was passed by an amazing vote, 13-2. Veletta, Lill, and Ed Oakley were on the city council then, and they worked with us and Laura to help ensure the victory. Ed is in the audience with us tonight. Raise your hand, Ed. And the verbiage of that ordinance, and again, this was 22 years ago, the verbiage of the ordinance provides protections in employment, housing, and access to all places of public accommodation. I'm going to point out quickly too, there are 3 dear people here who were heavily involved with DGLA, serving on the DGLA board in this time, and they were a very strong force working to get this citywide ordinance passed. And there were others that aren't in the room, but I want to recognize the 3 who are. Patty Fink, Ms. Hendricks, and Dr. Veletta. Thank you all. Okay, in the years since the ordinance was passed, I just want to let you know that it wasn't a dead document. Great things continued to happen. City employment policies were further expanded to ensure equal protections for LGBTQ employees in every possible way, including spousal benefits, healthcare benefits, the whole big package. And that also ultimately included full medical coverage for all medical needs for trans employees of the city of Dallas. So that work was largely led by what had been instituted just a little while before they dug in on this topic, and it was the City of Dallas's LGBTQ task force. Again, Patty Fink and many others in our community were very involved in that. And they pushed and pushed and pushed and worked largely with Adam Madrano helping to shepherd a lot of this through. And so ultimately that ordinance that was passed to provide protections for the city employees in 95 just kept going. And the ordinance that was passed in 2002 kept going, and they go until today. So it's something that I think our city and our community in particular needs to be very proud of. Yeah. So I'm going to now just introduce our lovely panel. I love all of them, and like I said, I'm honored that they're my friends. I decided the best way to introduce them was I'm going to do a collective praise of how wonderful they all are. Because I could talk for 10 minutes or longer about each one of them individually and the remarkable things that they have done for this city always, for decades. and continue to do to this day. None of these people, even the ones who've been out of political office for some time, they've never stopped giving back, they've never stopped working, they've never stopped making this place, our city, our world better. And thank you all for that. So our panel is the distinguished Laura Miller, who was first on the city council and served as our Dallas mayor from 2002 to 2007. Chris Luna, who served on the Dallas City Council from 1991 to 1997. Veletta Lill, who served on the council from 1997 to 2005. And my dear Cece Cox, who has been the CEO of Resource Center, a phenomenal organization you're all aware of, since 2010, and on the staff there 3 years before that, but she continues in that role to today. I'm going to turn it over to Cece right now.
Well, this is really fun. I had a blast preparing for this, and however, discovered that I've forgotten more than I remembered. I hope it's accurate. There are some things I know are accurate, and then there's some I'm a little bit hazy on, but I bet there's people in the audience that can fill me in. And there's so many wonderful folks here, and Harriet walked in. She's always been there for us. At the ISD and the Texas Ledge and everywhere, and sweet John Wimberly sitting next to Ed, served on the DGLA board. If you want to know how stuff got started with the DPD paying attention, John Wimberly can tell you all the tales. So, okay, Robert Emery asked that we remember that we're speaking not only to this audience, but people 50 years from now who might be wanting to learn these things. So I'm going to try to keep that in mind, and I think on that note, it's a little bit important to set some of the larger cultural, historical context. So I'm starting off talking about the first non-discrimination ordinance in the city of Dallas, and that was passed in 1995, which would mean that we were coming out of the beginning of when Don't Ask, Don't Tell had been instituted, so we could not serve openly in the military. Marriage wasn't even on the table yet. We were still deemed criminals under the law, at least in Texas, because of Texas Penal Code 2106. And the cocktail of medications that started to save lives for individuals living with HIV had not come about until mid-1995. So the climate was much different. There was so much fear and discrimination that resulted because of people's fear around AIDS. And being out was really a lot different than it is now for many people. And there was something called, literally, the name of it was, a video that was produced by some far-right groups and this quack psychologist whose last name is Nicolosi, and the video was titled The Gay Agenda, and it was distributed to every member of Congress and on Capitol Hill in Washington. So the amount of propaganda that was permeating the culture was almost overwhelming. So it's within that context that we now jump to January 1995. And Craig McDaniel and Chris were the city council elected leaders spearheading this initiative and started out to amend the existing non-discrimination policy, which was an HR policy for the city of Dallas, and proposing to add sexual orientation as a covered protected class in that policy. The policy already covered other types of categories. And in doing so, with it being the HR manual, we're approaching it as an administrative matter, which didn't require an entire full hearing and public debate, et cetera, but would be handled in a more quiet administrative way. So that happened, and the vote was taken on January 11th and voted in favor 9-5. However, city manager, some members of council didn't like that result and critiqued it successfully, came around and said, hey, we can't do that. They posed a question to the city manager, Sam Lindsay, and Sam ruled, gave his opinion that, okay, it does need to be publicly noticed and have a full hearing with members of the public being able to come and make their say. Am I getting this right, Counselor? Okay. So far, so good. Phew.
Yeah, but that'll take like half of my comments.
Oh. Okay. Okay, maybe I could go to the more behind the scenes stuff. All right. But the reason I wanted to talk about that is because it just became so juicy. Like, people were PO'd. And this is in the day where I ran my own business at the time, and Lisa Means was my partner. A lot of you know her. And so we had this room where we officed out of at our house, and we had thermal fax machines. Remember those? The paper was thermal, that waxy paper, and we had landlines. So I was walking around at home all day with my landline phone and my other hand on the thermal fax machine, and we were with LGBTQ faxing out all this, our own rally the troops. Come to City Hall, come on this day, write your city council members, just all the information that people needed to reach out to City Hall, because there was going to be a vote on January 25th, 2 weeks after the original vote. So everybody was mobilized, fired up, and Craig reached out to Coretta Scott King at the, what was the name of the organization? It wasn't the King Foundation. King Center, thank you very much. And she sent a letter in support. Someone headed up reaching out to corporations, so American Airlines was in support, AT&T, Conoco, some large corporate 500s in this area. They wrote letters of support because the corporate sector, as usual, had been ahead, and many of them had already passed non-discrimination ordinances that were inclusive of sexual orientation. And there had been other major cities that had done it, but this was in the early days. So any evidence that Dallas didn't have to be the first was important and significant to kind of help quell the fear in getting this done. And it was also an important strategy that we reach out to the faith community, because there were objections from people of faith, but not all people of faith. And so there was a strong contingency of folks who had shown up from the Unitarian Church, Methodist Church, Presbyterians, etc., to speak out also. A couple of things that I remember that wouldn't be on the public record that were a little more personal was, I remember vaguely, rather hazily, some really late, like midnight meeting with you and Craig McDaniel in some bar off of Henderson with a purple sofa, and we were strategizing what we were going to do, and all these things like divide and conquer, and who was going to be in charge of reaching out to whom, and what we anticipated and what we thought was going to go down. Do you have any recollection of that whatsoever?
No.
And we were not drinking. It was a coffee shop. We weren't drinking booze, so it's not because I couldn't remember. It's because it was 29 years ago, and some stuff has happened since then. So that was one thing I remember in addition to the thermal fax machine. The long and short of it, well, a couple other things are that, and Steve and I have laughed about this, the level of, compatible with that video that I was talking about, the gay agenda, was the way that people were opposed to this and voiced it. So the council chambers were packed, and the flag room up above, before you descend into the council chambers, were packed. And one of the characters was Flip Benham. You might remember. Oh, you remember. So, yeah. And if you were ever a woman, or anyone else for that matter, that ever sought services at Bruce Street Women's Clinic, which one of the many things they did was provide abortions, because people need those. Flip Benham and Operation Rescue was the name of his group. They would show up and protest there. So, this is just what they did. They were anti many things. And they were in the flag room, and they were doing big public prayer and making a fuss and handing out flyers. And I've got one of their old flyers, big giant cross, and just more propaganda, untruths about our community. Because I don't have anything against people of faith. I come out of faith community myself, but I don't like people who lie. So all that was going down, and we had to walk through all of that to get into chambers. And I'm also a parent. And I think the ways that we act and the way we conduct ourselves around our children are even more than our words many times. So the chamber included children who had come with their parents, and they were wearing really large, round they were made out of cardboard, but buttons essentially, looked like buttons. And it said in big letters, homo, and then had a big red line drawn through it, so no homo. Which I think that messaging with your children is abhorrent, in my opinion, and goodness only knows how many children grew up being gay from those families and probably scarred for life. So it was really, some of these things we can laugh about, but it was very impactful to me personally. I was 33. I was just turned 33 a couple days before this vote, and as a young activist in the community, but hours of listening to people talk about me and my friends and our lives is demoralizing and demeaning and humiliating. But it doesn't have to be if you're able to walk through that. And the upside is that I was part of this, the good fortune of being part of this amazing community that pulled together to make these things happen. And everything that we did, I try to remember this, came up on a context of someone else. I work at an organization that was founded by Bill Nelson and Terry Thibodeau, and John Thomas was the first executive director, and Ann Brown was on the board, and all this history of many others too, of whatever is happening today is happening because of so many things that happened before us. And for you people 50 years from now listening to this, then bless you for carrying it on, because at one point I do want to sit in a rocking chair. So Dallas did the right thing and passed that non-discrimination ordinance in 1995. I'm supposed to talk about a couple other things too, but I want to be respectful of the rest of the group. So can I just have 2 more minutes to talk about? DART also happened, the passage of something at DART, Dallas Area Rapid Transit, also happened in 1995. So things started to happen pretty quickly. And also, yet, a takeaway is that things are still happening now. So as recently as 2018, there was a change to something at DISD. So it is a continual journey when you're in a movement, and there is the proverbial 2 steps forward and 3 steps back sometimes. So DART is where I'm not as clear on some certain things, but Terry Hodge, who later became an elected state representative and an awesome leader, always in favor of our community, proposed an amendment to DART's non-discrimination policy such that it would start to include sexual orientation as a covered class. It failed on June 13th, 1995. Some of the reasons against it were, we'll have a bunch of lawsuits. This is a special interest group. We will legitimize inappropriate sexual lifestyle. This would lead to partner benefits. Did we be fair? There hasn't been any discrimination reported. We don't discriminate. This is part of the gay agenda. So themes are showing up in many of these things. It was not as contentious. There was not as much public debate, but we did rally the troops. And Steve was cited in an article that I read in The Voice that you had provided a list of corporations who had already taken this step, and once again, being able to exhibit who had already done these things took some of the fear out of it. Ultimately, DART did vote to include sexual orientation. And then in 2010, sometimes these things happen proactively and sometimes they happen out of contention. In 2010, at that point I was at Resource Center, and we got a report from a transgender woman who was on staff that the general counsel had somehow been meddling in a private matter, which was her going into court and working on her name and gender marker. So that was very odd and inappropriate. And so we started working with DART to encourage them to include gender identity and gender expression in their non-discrimination statements, which they ultimately did. So that brings me to the note that, unfortunately, or fortunately, there's 2 ways to look at it, but in 1995, what I said was that the city of Dallas added sexual orientation into its non-discrimination policy. So even in our own community, we were not having on the radar full inclusivity of transgender individuals and the protections based on gender identity and gender expression. That's a regret that I have. It was a lack of awareness I feel that our community had, and in some cases it was ignorance, and in some cases it was deemed risky, and in some cases there was bias and we didn't know what to do. So those full inclusivity steps have taken time over the decades and now are more inclusive at all of those places. Last but not least, also in 1995, so I guess Steve and I didn't sleep very much, and neither did a lot of other people, because there really was a lot of community support. I'm not joking about like sending out the faxes. I mean, people were calling and showing up and speaking in these public forums, which took a lot of courage. So in February of 1995, Jose Plata was openly gay. He was elected in a special election to the DISD board. And another theme, having our voices there because we are queer people and having our voices with our allies has been so instrumental in getting these things done. So that remains important. Remember that when you go to any election. So Jose's elected in February. This is still 1995. In September, Dan Peavy was a trustee, and he was reported, and the recording was released publicly, where he went nuts. And he was saying, using these words, excuse me, but these are facts, fag, fucking queer, niggers, described a woman as tits off a fucking warthog, also described a woman as a cow. He used the language fucking queer, and that was directed at Jose Plata, his fellow elected trustee. That was sent to the media. As you could imagine, all hell broke loose, and there were protests on October the 3rd, 1995, which included acting out against that or speaking out against that. Now, County Commissioner John Wiley Price, then Pastor Zan Holmes, then iconic leader in the Latin community, Adelpha Callejo, LGBTQ, and Dan Peavy resigned, thankfully. Then the board, the trustees passed a resolution, which is not an ordinance, is a statement, essentially, saying that we abhor the use of ethnic/racial, gender, sexual, and religious epithets by board members. What's missing? No mention of sexual orientation, gender identity, or gender expression. And what is a sexual epithet? So we fired off a letter and said, I think you need to change this language and include sexual orientation, and they did. So that was just that statement. Then in March of 1996, they proposed an anti-harassment policy. Don't ask me how it happened this way, except actually I think I do know. There was resistance. There was a committee inside called the Intercultural Relations Department. It was headed by a gentleman named Dr. Clarence Glover. I met with him personally, and I can tell you he didn't have an interest in including LGBTQ stuff. So they drafted this anti-harassment policy. Guess what it didn't have? Sexual orientation. So we brought that to their attention. Jose Plata spoke out. People came, we rallied, they showed up, and in 1996, March, a couple weeks later, see this pattern again, like first stab, not so much, 2 stabs later, 2 weeks later after the community shows up, as you all showed up, it worked out. So in March 1996, the ISD passed its first anti-harassment policy. I'm not going to go further. Things have progressed in a good way with other policies after that, but it's now time for me to turn over the mic.
I'm going to come to the podium because I'm not coordinated enough to look at my notes and hold a microphone and balance stuff on my lap. And because we're in the Rose Room, I did record my comments and will lip sync them. So if you can cue the track. Okay, so in July 1989, Micah England drove from her home in Oklahoma to apply for a job as a Dallas police officer. When she interviewed in Dallas, she answered question number 14 honestly, acknowledging that yes, she was a lesbian. She was told that since consensual sexual contact between adults of the same gender was a violation of Texas law, section 21.06 of the Texas Penal Code, commonly referred to as the sodomy law, the Dallas Police Department could not and would not hire her. The theory was habitual criminals shouldn't be police officers. In May 1990, Micah sued the city and then Police Chief Mac Vines, challenging the constitutionality of the state sodomy law. I'd been on the council at that time for 3 months. I was elected to the city council when I was 30. And when you're 30, you know everything. So it was a great time to be an elected official. So that, in January 1992, I sponsored the resolution to stop that hiring ban and to allow LGBTQ police officers. And we had a public hearing to consider that resolution. The council chambers were packed and the overflow rooms were completely filled. The hearing ran from Wednesday evening into the early morning the next day, Thursday. After nearly 7 hours of passionate, provocative, and emotional public comments and debate, the city council voted on the resolution. And this was as reported from the New York Times. Quote, almost 300 citizens had spoken in the council chambers, a modern amphitheater of bare concrete, and whether they spoke for or against Agenda Item 77, almost all insisted that the council faced a stark choice between good and evil. Voting 10-5, the council adopted a resolution at 2 a.m. that prohibited the police department from hiring individuals who have a documented or admitted history of committing or acknowledging an intention to commit in the future deliberate, frequent violations of any law. Without saying it, the resolution was based on a 112-year-old Texas statute that outlawed physical relations between people of the same sex. End quote. And this quote came from This Week in Texas. I see a lot of old friends in the audience. Y'all remember This Week in Texas. Quote, I think that this has really energized the gay and lesbian community in Dallas, said John Thomas. The overall effect is that it moves the gay community along. There was no coercive effort, no buses, and yet there were 2 or 3 overflow rooms full of people who gave their support to this issue, end quote. But after eventually losing that lawsuit, the city lost that lawsuit, there was still no non-discrimination policy for city employees that included sexual orientation. So in January 1995, Councilman Craig McDaniel and I sponsored the resolution to adopt that policy. And again, we had a public hearing. While, as Cece pointed out, the policy had been quietly approved 2 weeks early as part of our update to our human resources policy, the city attorney ruled that it was subject to court challenge since it did not strictly comply with the requirements in the Texas Open Meetings Act, which is you have to post what you're going to debate and vote on. So with the council chambers packed, with LGBTQ supporters outnumbering the opponents 2-1, the result was different than 1992. And as Cece mentioned, it was unbelievable. I mean, in the chambers, there's kind of a balcony was full, the flag room was full. On the 6th floor behind the chambers is what's called the briefing room. It was full, it was just packed. And so this came from Tammy Nash in the Dallas Voice. Quote, after almost 3 hours of comment from citizens and debate by council members, the Dallas City Council voted Wednesday evening to extend the city's non-employment discrimination policy, I get choked up, I really do, to include sexual orientation. As the vote tally was displayed on overhead screens Wednesday evening, the packed council chambers erupted in cheers and thunderous applause from supporters. End quote. I can't do justice. Robert earlier mentioned the UNT archives. If you go there and do a search for non-discrimination or gay police, you'll come up with some clips from NBC5 from the time, and they're unbelievable. The things that Cece was talking about, what some of them were saying, it's just unbelievable. So that's your homework assignment. And for those of you 50 years from now who are watching this, go do the research and go Google it and watch those old news clips, because you will be appalled at what the opponent said. But think about this. So in 3 years, from 1992 to 1995, we made progress, going from losing to 10-5 to prevailing to 9-6. And then when you talk about the 2002 ordinance, that will be talked about in a second, in that 10 years went from losing 10-5 to winning 13-2. Wow. And the kind of advocacy organization that it takes to be able to move that pendulum is pretty amazing. I've got some, yeah, I think so. I've got some takeaways for the youngsters who watch this in 50 years that I'll comment on later. So when Steve asks us a question, I'm gonna give that answer no matter what the question is. What are the 4 things I learned from this experience? So 10 years later, the 1995 vote, I wrote an op-ed for the Dallas Morning News talking about all the good that came out of that policy change for the city and the foundation that it laid for some of these other things, and how other local governments and private companies were adopting similar policies. So those 9 votes were on the right side of history. Cece talked about the importance of having a representation, and there's an old saying in politics that if you don't have a seat at the table, you're probably on the menu. And so during my council terms, along with Councilman Craig McDaniel, we increased AIDS funding, we appointed dozens of LGBTQ folks to city boards and commissions, and we had a seat at the table as we developed city programs and policies. So, fast forward today, we have out LGBTQ police officers and an LGBTQ police liaison, which is pretty amazing. And we have tons of out city employees, actually have a affinity group for LGBTQ employees. They're usually in the Pride Parade. And as the next speakers, Laura and Veletta will talk about, we have a citywide ordinance preventing discrimination based on sexual orientation, gender identity, and expression in housing, employment, and public accommodations. And today, we have 10 rainbow crosswalks on Oak Lawn that you can see out front. We have the rainbow flag flying at City Hall during the month of June. And we have a wonderful senior housing development for LGBTQ seniors. These are all reminders of how far we've come. But if you read today's newspaper about what's going on with DPS and the Department of Health in terms of changing driver's license, you can see we've got a lot more work to do.
Absolutely.
I didn't see a single mistake.
Will this go toward the 50,000 match?
Yes. That's like $2.
I'm having flashbacks. Chris is having dollars placed in his belt, and Laura has her reporter's notebook. Here comes Laura. I want to thank you for having me here tonight. Before I get started, I want to say a big thank you to the Dallas Way. As somebody who loves history, goes to the Met to preserve it, and is a true archive geek, I cannot tell you how important it is to have your stories archived for that kid 50 years from now. So thank you. I also saw Leo here in the Dallas Voice, and having a newspaper that prints the stories in real time is a true value. So thank you. The 1990s and the early 2000s were heady times for activism, and in many ways it was birthed of the 1980s AIDS crisis, and what we have heard today was rank homophobia. Our legacy heroes like George Harris, Jack Evans, people like that, Micah England that you've heard about today, lost jobs, didn't get jobs, those kinds of things. We wanted to make sure later on that would never happen. Those of us up here have had a long fight, many fights. We've shown up to meetings, we've shown up in court, we've shown up at the clinics, we've shown up in the boardrooms. But in the 1990s and beyond, we started showing up at City Hall and in our school board meetings. That's where the real power is. If you want to think about whether you're going to be a council member, or a state rep, or a congressman, or a senator, please somebody, Think about being a council member. The greatest touch, the most impact that you can have is at a local level. So I encourage you to involve yourself in local government, whether you're an appointee or whether you run for office. But it is truly, truly important. And that's the way you truly change minds. Oh my God, what was that? I moved here in 1985. Sodomy laws were on the books. We didn't have a solution or cocktails for AIDS, and we had lots of discrimination. But we've made those changes. In 1993, I was appointed by Lori Palmer, and if you remember Lori, she represented Oklahoma in the day. I think Lori and Craig Holton were the first council members to ride in the Pride Parade, if I remember right, way back, when council members did not show their faces. I had worked on Craig McDaniel's election. And back then, you actually sat around tables and wrote cards and licked envelopes. And somebody like Lori Bartos would take those buckets to the mailbox for you. But I got to know Lori. Lori appointed me to the Human Services Commission. And I got to know from that a man by the name of Hector Garcia, who would later become my appointee to the Plan Commission and appointed by Ron Kirk as chair. I also had the joy of serving with Kathy Adams. They're old enough to remember she and Phyllis Shapley were good buddies until the 2016 election when they parted ways over Donald Trump. But we would have to, the Human Services Commission was really about health and human services. They were boring meetings in the middle of the afternoon on Monday, once a month. And we talked about AIDS funding and ice cream trucks and all kinds of things like that. Seriously. But every time AIDS funding came up, every time an AIDS program came up, anything to do with AIDS, Kathy would start going on. And so you would look at your agenda and go, oh, well, she's going to be active today. But that's where the changes were made to how the city dealt with AIDS programs and AIDS policy, which is important as well. I later was appointed by Craig McDaniel to serve on the Board of Adjustment, zoning variances. Don't go to sleep. But I got to serve with a man by the name of Don McCleary. And Don was our chair and a smart dude. And Ed Oakley is here, and he was laughing about how Don really understood the zoning. He was a really good chair. And today, even today, I believe, Gardier, what is it now, Gardier Sewell, still does a scholarship in Don McCleary's name. So he still has a legacy. So in 1997, I'm elected to the Dallas City Council. The headline in the Dallas Morning News was hand-picked successor of the first openly gay councilman. So I didn't get like a name, I got forever attached to my dear friend, Craig McDaniel. I had the support of the gay community going in. Believe it or not, I ran in an open seat in 1997, and I did not have an opponent, which for District 14 was amazing.
You were the best thing that ever happened to us.
along to chat. But seriously, serving on boards and on the council is more, there's a lot of glory and celebration and cutting ribbons and riding in Pride Parade and going to black tie dinner. But the rubber meets the road when we work on 2002 ordinance. When we get in a room with people and hash it out, what are we gonna do? How are we going to do this? Who's gonna show up? Who are we gonna call? And we had a great council at that point. Ed Oakley, Elba Garcia, Lois Finkelman, John Loza, rest his soul, was also on the council with us. And in that picture, whoever posted the picture, thank you, darlings, because I look so young. But we bonded over this. And Laura was such a great leader because she really came right to her mayoral seat with, we're going to do this. And I thank you for that, because you never quit. And here, I'm going to leave you with this lesson. I talked about Hector Garcia, who sat on the Human Services Commission with me, and was later my plan commission. When it came for the day of the ordinance, he had served on the plan commission with 3 sitting council members. Bill Blades, Leo Cheney, and James Fantroy. Leo and James from the black community were not certain they were going to go along with this. They were not certain. The black church wasn't totally there yet. But when Hector got up and spoke, he spoke to those 3 council members. When they made their speeches, they said, I know Hector Garcia. I know this is the right thing to do. And so it is knowing people who are sitting there, working with people who are sitting there, that truly changes lives. So thank you.
Okay, I'm the closer, so I'm going to tell you how it really worked. And the good thing about being a former newspaper reporter is that you do have all the notebooks from your entire career, including my inauguration as mayor that talked about this ordinance, and many other notes from this period, which I brought with me. So here, we'll set the stage here, because Veletta's being a little bit humble. I want to also talk about Ed. So I'm on the council from Oak Cliff, and Veletta is talking about this ordinance. She's working with John Loza on it, and Elba Garcia is supportive, and Lois, but it's not moving, okay? John is spearheading it because he's our openly gay council member and he's in charge. But he was looking for the right time, okay? And there was pushback from some of the black council members, and it just didn't feel like the right time. So, something happened in May of 2001. Ed Oakley gets elected to the city council, okay? So now you've got Veletta and Ed, okay? Now, Veletta's husband is a pilot, so I'm gonna give you an analogy. If the plane is going down and you really want to get there, Veletta will sit quietly in the cockpit and she will call every single person in the world to figure out how to do the instrumentation to get down on the runway. Ed Oakley in the back of the plane will rip the door open and jump out of the plane without a parachute. So these two get together and things start cooking. So while they're doing that, I quit the council to run for mayor because Ron Kirk has left. He quit to run for the US Senate, so there's an open seat. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm either gonna be the mayor or I'm gonna be off the council, because you have to quit the council to run. So I quit. Now, let me tell you about my campaign. This will tell you how the atmosphere was. I had 4 co-chairs on my campaign. 2 were Vance Miller, if you remember Vance Miller, very strong conservative businessman, real estate company, and Donna Bloomer, my dear friend from the Dallas City Council, who was also extremely conservative. They are my 2 finance chairs, but across the table from them are my other 2 finance chairs, Kathy Hewitt and Ann Fay. That was before they were a thing, okay? So they're working on my campaign. Now, if you can imagine what those meetings were like, okay? With the Republican Eagle Forum on one side of the table and Anna and Kathy on the other. But we all had the same goal. We wanted me to get elected. So, I'll tell you the night because Erin Moore reminded me of this tonight, and if I don't tell it now, people down the road will never remember this night, okay? So, this is how close I was to the community. I'm at my biggest gay fundraiser at the Roundup, okay? It's wild. I mean, we have a ton of people there. Half the people in this room were there. So much fun. Really festive. And at one point I said, you know, my family has a long history in the community because my husband has been in the Texas legislature for 2 decades. And every time there was a really bad bill that came up that discriminated against gay people, gay adoption, whatever came up, my husband was the one who was there holding his finger in the dike. And I said that thinking of the Dutch levy system in Europe. And I remember the room erupted, okay? People went wild. And I turned to Kathy Hewitt and I said, what's happening? What's going on? She said, repeat after me. And I'm like, oh my God. Okay, so that was the atmosphere of my campaign. So I had this side of my life and I had this side of my life. So I get elected, and when I spoke from the heart the day of the inauguration, I said I have 5 top goals that I really want to get done. And one of the 5 was the anti-discrimination ordinance, which was very surprising, just half of that table. And I'll tell you, it was upsetting to me because as soon as I said it, Donna Bloomer, my best friend who had been on the council with me for years, stopped talking to me. And we didn't talk until 5 years ago. And it was, and she was just shocked that I had that as a priority and didn't know it was coming. And she was my dearest friend, and I'm so lucky now that I talk to her a lot and we're very close again. But it was very, very upsetting for me that this happened. So when you get elected mayor, of course, it's like a fire hose, right? I had Kay Bailey Hutchison beating on the door, wanting to meet with me because she was worried I wasn't going to fund the Trinity River. You had the Dallas Police Association who wanted raises, the business community, the developers. So I'm looking in this notebook last night, and I think, what was my first meeting as mayor? Well, guess what? The anti-discrimination ordinance. Because of these 2, okay? So the first meeting was the city attorney, the city manager, Steve Atkinson, Veletta, Ed, and Elva Garcia.
Yeah.
And that was the first meeting, and then within 10 weeks, we passed that ordinance. And I'll tell you, on the day of the vote, like Chris, it's very emotional on the day of the vote. And it was an overwhelming vote. But I remember in my comments, I specifically said, I want to give a shout out to my stepsister in San Francisco, who is gay. And I want to give a shout out to my uncle in Ocala, Florida, because he's gay. And little did I know that day that my 11-year-old daughter would be sitting here tonight with us, with her wife, Jenny. So Alex Woolens and Jenny Vincent, my daughter-in-law, you need to look around this room because you're the youngest people in it. And you need to learn a lesson. And you need to have a community like this. And it's not easy to build, okay? This is the most impactful, largest, badass gay community in America. I want to thank everybody here. You know, all of you guys were involved, virtually everybody here was involved in what happened. And Harriet Earhart, my God, you're just an amazing woman. We're back here tonight. But to many other good things happening for Dallas and for this community and for my community and my children. And thank you for letting us come tonight and be with you all.
This has been so phenomenal for me, and I hope for you too. There's so many things that flood through my mind and my memories when you're all talking, and I know we're all doing the same thing and thinking the same thing. Let me just say a couple of those quickly because I just sort of, I think, put an exclamation mark on the remarkable happenings that we've talked about tonight. I remember so strongly how horrible the hatred was, as Cece mentioned in that first ordinance, and she talked about some of that. And I'll say something which she and I still joke about, and we can still laugh about it. So in the flag room, one of the prayer circles, as Cece and I were walking by, this young woman just screaming at the top of her lungs, looks up and says, "Oh dear God, they've let the evil in our city today." Because we were going to protect city employees from discrimination, we let the evil into our city. And then went on, there's more verbiage, Sodom and Gomorrah, all that stuff. So while that hatred was so strong and so raw and so real, and also going on in that era were some really nasty things on the hatred side, right? Craig McDaniel and his partner at the time. I thought he never got, he's here. Craig McDaniel. I'm so glad you made it. We didn't know you were perfectly excited. I was going to, and before the evening closed, I was going to be sure you weren't out here. So you've been mentioned a lot of times tonight, but thank you. But I remember, and Craig, you obviously remember, the extreme hatred that led to things like vandalism, death threats, yeah. So that was the thing. That was going on for Craig and some of us others in that time. That's how severe the hatred was. But the love and the support and the kick-ass factor of our community way prevailed over that, right? And yes, and the love and the support and those willing to help were not just members of our community, because we could not do this alone. You can't ever win an activism battle or progress in a movement, especially one that deals with any kind of civil rights, equal rights, any of that. You can't do that alone. You can't do it as just your part of the overall community. You've got to do it with support of allies. And we have always figured out how to do that and had many willing people who jumped on board and helped us do that, like these ones on the stage. So I hope that you will all, and you 50 years later who watch this, will all, and this is sort of something that Laura touched on, will all understand and remember what has come before you, because I am always mindful of those that came before me. Cece and I were kind of the second generation of leaders in this community, along with a lot of you in this room. There were some giants who preceded us who have been mentioned tonight, and there's more than we could name. But we stood on their shoulders. That's how it works. And that's how it has to work going forward. And I'm confident that in 50 years, somebody watching this, there's going to be something you're going to need to fight for too.
Amen.
Right?
Yes.
The battles are never over. You look at what's happening in our politics, women's rights, those who are attempting to take away the rights that we have gained as LGBTQ people. The fight will never, ever, ever be over, but we can and we will always prevail. So we are targeting ending this at 7:30 because, you know, we know people want to drink and bathroom and all of that. I'm going to ask these dear ones if they have any final thought they want to say, because there were so many that were coming into my mind, and it's so hard. There's so much we could all say tonight. So,
Laura spoke of the city attorney in the room, which I think was David Schultz.
And Madam Johnson.
And John Rogers, two openly gay city attorneys. Not only were we all together as a body, an elected body, but we had the people who were writing those ordinances that were also in the community. So, and David went on to DART and worked to further expand those things. I ended up sitting, chairing Parkland Foundation Board, and ended up changing the Parkland Hospital ordinance after that. So,
and that made me think of Mary Soon, city manager, a straight woman who was such an ally for us in all this stuff. She never was fighting back or pushing back. She was all ready to go, go, go. And then when Laura was her bear boss, she was totally ready to do that. But she was ready to do it even before that.
We really need to steady ourselves for the upcoming legislative session, and it's not going to be any better than the last one. And I'm gonna, this is a little bit crazy, but I'm gonna tell this story because you have opportunities will come up. You may not necessarily be talking to an elected official, you might be talking to a neighbor, or you might have an encounter with somebody that you meet, but we have absolutely, even with all the things that have been accomplished, we absolutely have to keep telling our stories and speaking up and showing up and being who we are. And doing it in the most, well, I advise anyway, doing it in the most educational way possible, even though these things can be so maddening that we're still defending our very existence decade after decade after decade. But I literally told a Texas state representative last session, no, drag queens are not walking across stage naked showing their penis to children in drag shows, because that's what this person thought in conjunction with debating the drag bill. So these misperceptions are out there, and they are impacting our lives and our friends' lives. And I'm not trying to be crude about it, it's just, we've got to hit it head on. And we know these things, we live these things every day. And I'm not getting any younger, so my tolerance for this, you know, playing nice and taking my time is becoming diminished as the years go by. So stay strong.
Great question, Steve. What were the 4 things I learned through the 1995 experience? 1, progress at times may be incremental. A loss today can be a win tomorrow. And so, as I often say, a half a loaf is better than no loaf. 2, partnerships are key. We all need to partner and work with other similarly aligned groups. Women, people of color, religious groups, corporate world. We heard earlier about the letter that Craig McDaniel got from Coretta Scott King, which is what got Don Hicks and Sandra Ginshaw and Larry Duncan to vote yes on the 1995 ordinance. Once they had that covered, and that letter basically said, if Martin was here, this is what he would want and want you to do, game, set, match. 3, while allies are critical, and Laura and Veletta are the gold standard and being allies. It is also important that we have a place at the table. Representation matters. And so when you go to vote this fall, Julie Johnson, others, it matters.
Call it all red.
Falls on the ally group, very good. And then last, we have really learned how to be better at organizing, how to be strategic, and how to communicate our issues. Those are key, and those are the points that we need to keep on going. We can't regress back to the days where we let the rumor mongers and the half-truths or half-untruths or all untruths win. And so that's what the 1995 ordinance experience taught me. Now, to close us out.
Two quick things. We all forgot to mention, and we talked about it in our prep call, one of the reasons that the ordinance had such a great big vote, 13-2, is because Don Carty, who at the time ran American Airlines, came and spoke that day and said, if my company, one of the largest airlines in the world, can have an anti-discrimination ordinance policy in-house, you can do it as a city. And that was huge. So kudos to him. And the other company that also did that for us was Blockbuster. Okay? Jim Keyes ran Blockbuster back then. So those were really helpful. And I'm going to close by saying, you're going to vote in a month. And the city charter amendments, there are 17 of them. You may have already heard this, but the last three, they're S, T, and U. Okay? We had a press conference last week. Veletta and I were there. And every living mayor and the entire current city council and a lot of former council members are against S, T, and U. They were not put on there by the city. They were put on there by a private interest group funded by a gentleman who went to the Capitol on January 6th. And they want to mandate how City Hall spends its money. They want to strip governmental immunity from the city of Dallas. Would be the only city in the country that didn't have governmental immunity for our police and firemen and our employees. They want to do a survey, 1,400 people a year in a city of 1.3 million, and depending on the results of the survey, they'll either double the raise of the city manager or fire the manager. Okay, so crazy things that please don't vote for. We're going to be spending the next month working, Veletta and I and many other people, to defeat them. But it would be chaos for our city and divert a lot of money and reprioritize City Hall. So ST and U vote no.
It's stupid. Yes,
ST and U are stupid.
Again, thank you all so much for being here, and even more importantly, thank you for supporting the work of the Dallas Way to preserve and present the history of our community. See, I've been fighting getting to it. Thank you, Veletta, Laura, Chris, and Cece.